So good evening, everyone. We have finally arrived at the third session of today's symposium. Before we begin the roundtable discussion, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce two distinguished guests, representatives from the Look Himself Educational Foundation. First, Mrs. Anna Kong, Chairman of the Board of the Look Himself Educational Foundation. And Ms. Angel Ip, member of the Allocation Committee and the Secretariat. On behalf of the Department of Architecture and the faculty, I would like to express our heartfelt gratitude to the Look Himself Educational Foundation for their generous support of this event, as well as educational initiatives on contemporary Chinese architecture launch in celebration of the faculty's 75th anniversary. This means various initiatives between now and June 30th that concerns contemporary Chinese architecture in both research and teaching and knowledge exchange generously supported. Thank you very much. What are they? They include not just today's symposium, but also 6 public lectures in this academic year by leading contemporary Chinese architects. Also architectural study trips in Greater Bay Area and beyond in China for both academic staff and students, as well as in June 2026, an exhibition of student and staff work in dialogue with the legacy and work of architect Look himself. Together, these events aim to foster critical reflection, cross-cultural exchange, and deeper engagement with the evolving architectural landscape of contemporary China. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming again Mrs. Anna Kong, who will deliver a few remarks.
Good. Okay. Good evening, Professor Chung, Professor Sang, distinguished guest speakers, and students. It is my great pleasure to join you tonight at this symposium. It is also especially meaningful for the Look Himself Educational Foundation, as this symposium is the very first program which the foundation has supported in Hong Kong. Let me take a few minutes to share some background about the late Mr. Look himself and his foundation. Mr. Look was one of the first generation of Chinese architects to graduate from the Architectural Association School of Architecture in London in the late 1920s. He returned to work on projects in the mainland in 1930 before coming to Hong Kong in 1949. His notable projects include the Bank of China building in Shanghai, the So Oak Village in Hong Kong, and also the Maryknoll Sisters Hospital in Hong Kong, which is now known as the Lady Maryknoll Hospital. One project deserves special mention is the St. Ignatius Chapel at Hua Yan College, Kowloon. The chapel not only stands out as one of Hong Kong's significant architectural achievements, but also has a very close connection with the Hong Kong University. In fact, the architect of the overall college project was Professor Gordon Brown, the founding dean of the Hong Kong University Department of Architecture back in 1950. That's why this event is such a significant moment. Today, we are bringing the vision and the aspiration of Mr. Look back to Hong Kong University. His passion and philosophy for architecture are evident not only in his works, but also in legacy that transcends time and place. Mr. Look has left a lasting impact on future generations through his ideals, fueled progress in modern Chinese architecture, and sparked inspiration among wave after wave of aspiring architects. As it is for this reason that the Look Himself Educational Foundation was established in 2015 to carry forward his lifelong dedication to the promotion of modern Chinese architecture in China and the nurturing of young architectural talents. It's worth noting that the foundation first began its journey in the mainland, supporting architectural education at several universities, such as Tsinghua University, Tongji University, Southeast University, and South China University of Technology. As we start to extend this mission to Hong Kong in 2025, we aim to gradually support more educational projects in the Greater Bay Area, further enhancing cross-border cooperation. The Foundation will continue to support aspiring students to pursue their dreams through scholarships, architectural competitions, and student exchange programs and events, such as today's symposium. I would like to thank our esteemed guest speakers for joining us today and for sharing your valuable insights with us. I wish all of you a fruitful and inspiring exchange. And may this gathering mark the beginning of many more meaningful steps forward together for modern Chinese architecture. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, because it's quite late, so let's cut to the chase, as we say in America. So anyway, we had a long afternoon, and we have received so much information. It's very hard to really pick a subject matter to discuss. But however, the last one is the one you remember usually the most. So actually, I wanted to start with Professor Wang Junyang's talk. Actually, the very last page. I don't know if we could still see it, because it's a very important document in my mind. That one last page.
Go back to the slide.
Can you go back to the last page of Professor Wang's presentation? Because it's what he put as the framing of an agenda for architecture theory, basically. Oh, discourse. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. And he used the word discourse. To me, you can go through it very quickly, right? 3 points, or rather 3 discourse. Not, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, I don't need to read it. You can see it. For me, the question is, I think this is a very clear agenda for discourse. Could that also be a clear agenda for action? That's my question, really. So which means not only theorists, but also architects could take that agenda and do something about it.
Anyone?
Yeah. No, Professor Wang.
Professor Wang's here. Yeah.
So do you think it could be also an agenda for actions from architects?
Yeah, definitely. I think without excluding many other aspects from architecture, I think it is very important today to go beyond the dichotomies of West and China and tradition in the modern. I'm writing architecture of in East Asia in my history book. If you look at the history of that part of the world, you can see that kind of discourse had a very long history. Every country and the region are facing this kind of problems, and people always talk about that. And I believe people will continue to talk about these issues. But my question is that whether theoretical studies of architecture, or theoretical discourse, should theoretical discourse be confined with these issues, or it is compelled to move beyond these issues. I think my question pertains to this this problem, and also the social issues, and how to make architecture more available for the society is very much needed in today's China. And otherwise, we are confined with architecture autonomy, and it's a kind of play for architects themselves. I think that's very problematic. So I wish we can go beyond that without denying the importance of architecture for itself. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Let me give an example to try to explain that. Compare, the scale doesn't work well, but think of Jakun's East Village, and then think of Liu Yichun's River Passage. They both create a space, different intensities for sure, but they both create a space for spontaneous, collective gatherings and play, skateboarding. You know what they do. They both have social ambitions. Just for case of argument, for the purpose of argument, my sense is that Yichun's is more architectural. It uses the question of autonomy, I think, is fraught, because to be an architectural address of social issues is different from to be a political or social address of social issues, like making policy. And it seems to me that Yichun's architecture, which has to do with the roof and the way the passage is attached, it has to do with the detail of the stair, it has to do with the puncture. It adds a dimension that increases in a I would even say spiritual way. It elevates your mood in a way that I think East Village more supports rather than pushes. And so what I'm trying to say is that architecture as architecture, with its degree of autonomy, can be social. You don't have to not do architecture in order to be. I'm not saying that you're saying that, but that's what most people say. That's yeah.
Actually, Professor,
I think
rather than a degrading of
yeah. I mean, I think Young that we're agreeing a little bit, except with this disparaging too much the notion that some degree of autonomy, some degree of should remain if we're going to be social as architects, as opposed to voter.
I think you're absolutely right in saying that architects make contribution to social issues through architecture. That's correct. What I emphasize is the lack sort of social concern in architecture, and you can engage in social issues with your concern, and I think that's the difference between with concern, with social concern, without social concern. That's the difference. Yeah, I think Ma Yansong's Baiziwan social housing is an outstanding case that if the architect like Ma Yanzong could change his sort of concern or position in architecture, he could make a great contribution to social housing than many other architects, because he's very talented architect. He's ingenious architect. He has ability to do that. But the precondition is that he's engaged. He's willing to engage that. Thank you.
Maybe I'll also follow that, but primarily on try to recall what the discussion today, and a lot of emphasis been putting on the 1990s to early 2000s, that the beginning of new Chinese architecture, new contemporary Chinese architecture. In many ways, probably Yang Ho is one of the person who kicked off the idea, and many are surrounded the beginning of having a concept, which was not the case in the socialist influence or Beaux-Arts influence training, and then get into issues of material and construction. And I think this is also reflected in Li Hua's discussion paper, and also Edward's examples of the exhibition of the Tumu and those architects there, and the discussion, the issues of 非常建筑, which is non-standard, extraordinary, and standard architecture, and 标准建筑 and 基本建筑, basic architecture. That was discussion at the time. Right? And then I like to. So I think this is very important for today's, to me, as a refresh and enlightenment. But also, I'm also wondering, what happened after 2000s? Because these are the period of time, the last 20 years, that Chinese architecture flourished, and many architects being recognized and known in addition to that. And I wonder, any of you, and Zhu Xiaofeng is one of the generation of that, and I wonder if any of you want to share your thought on that. But that also bring into another issues, which is follow up Wang Junyang's discourse. Let's move away from tradition and then to move into issues or discourse. And let me also try to use Yang Ho for I record that his several exhibition. Yeah. Concept and materials, one of them, but at a certain period of time he started to talk about urban issues, and even I know Yang Ho for a long time, that he started to talk about social and architecture as well. That surprised me, but which means the experiences in China, he and many others start to aware these are important. Everyone's agree that the issues of Chinese contemporary cities is probably more important, more critical than architecture, right? So other issues such as how architecture respond to the urban condition, or environmental in large. I appreciate that Frampton talked about Yukongjian, that the notion of sponge city and so on. This is also a larger environmental concern that is equally critical in China. So I'm just using this to kick off. I wonder, any of you like to say something about what you think of what's happening after the early beginning of the contemporary, modern contemporary Chinese architecture, right? And for the last 20 years, what are the issues and which of those been addressed, such as housing that Wang Junyang mentioned. Actually, I remember our department had a symposium called Housing China. This is 10 years ago. 2013, UNIS is part of it. So we were serious about how Chinese architects are able to respond to the housing issue, which was the major mass of construction in China for the last 30 years, is those housing projects, made Vanke and those giant. So just kick off of that, yeah.
Maybe I can. I didn't do many housing projects, but maybe I will share some of my observations on my colleagues and then the friend architects who were practicing, also including some of my own experience. I would say well, I will focus on housing first, right? Because your question is so broad. I think the depression I got for housing projects in China is that the whole country is sharing the same typology as the plenary, as the whole thing is the whole housing system is totally controlled by the capitalism in a way, yeah, because it's a profit-driven system, starting from the government who get the. I mean, it's reasonable that they want to make the country running, so that's why they have to sell the land. What we call the sort of the land policy is the driven. So the government can only sell the land to the to developers, and then developer have to make money from it. So the social housing was somehow ignored in a way, yeah. In the first maybe decades, I don't know if I'm right, and then because it's profit driven, so I never try to do because I hate those projects because it's so banal. There's no interest. I was invited by Vanke to in maybe around 2010 to either design a community center or housing project. I choose the first one, not the housing, because what they gave me is to give me a mature plan and ask me to do the elevational design. So I rejected the project, and they said, "Xiaofeng, we don't need any, we don't need any new things. You just follow the plan. We can sell this, for the best profit. So, but we do need a nice elevation. We do need your expertise on how to design a apartment, not like a normal apartment, because they don't like those quiche housing. They want it to be the building look like housing, look like maybe an office or somehow kind of admirable building or landmarks. So what I end up is I understand as an architect housing is so important, so I have to do it as an utopian approach. I even joined your invitation for the Hong Kong Pavilion by myself by getting into like Chengdu Biennale and then Shenzhen Biennale, and then I every maybe 5 years I do a utopian projects, not for real. I never show it in the presentation of my own imagination or my own contribution as a mind practice to imagine what a future housing or what a future prototype of urbanization could be. So this is my own experience, and then maybe a few architects like Zhang Jiajing or someone I know who deal with who fight very very hardly with the system to try to do some innovative work in social housing, but it's true that it's very rare cases.
I don't mean to just bring the whole issue into social housing, but I'm trying to actually echo to what Wang Junyang was earlier talking about, this publicness or public architecture, that actually, the Chinese Architecture Media Award by Nanfang Dusbao, the newspaper is, I remember the issue was, the theme was about public architecture, 公民建筑, right? I think Tao was part of it, civil architecture. However, if we look at many of the achievement of Chinese architecture, contemporary Chinese architecture, public architecture or cultural architecture work, actually probably half of them or a third of them is the byproduct of housing. So they were housing development, and the developer want to build a cultural architecture as the actually community center or something for the housing real estate development. I think I'm correct on that. So in other words, though they are probably not also true public architecture be used by the public, right? They are in a chapel can be in the compound of the housing development, and this is almost like Tata Ando's chapel. Actually, it's a wedding chapel for the hotel, right? I'll stop right here, but I'd like to also invite other discussions.
Yeah, there's a problem for architects to talk of architecture, then always sort of go back to individual work, or whether this one is more talented than the others. We need to go back to the larger social context. And maybe the example, civil architecture is a very good case for us, like whether we can talk about today's architecture, Chinese architecture is so diverse or so singular. Is in the sort of a renaissance, is actually in the crisis. Because for Frampton is extremely diverse. For Wang Junyang, it's very singular because there's a lack of a social dimension. If we go back to towards civil architecture, actually I have to admit that I helped to make that slogan for that newspaper, because that back to that year around 2008, that newspaper had this ideal to help China to create a civil society. Shenzhen, even the city, even the government even wrote a report to the central government saying that Shenzhen want to become the very first civil society in China. Then the central government said, shut up. And a few years later, the word, it was not only censored, it was banned. Because we're only allowed to call public society rather than civil society. 公共社会 rather than 公民社会. Then it becomes like a meaningless, because society is by definition is public. So why you use public society, right? So the word disappearing, the consequence is huge, because since you don't have that word, then you don't have a discourse around that, to build around that. Then you don't have a platform to talk about that. Then you don't have that kind of culture to promote, to also persuade the developer, the government, to build up that kind of culture, right? Remember back to that, event, jurors had a lot of candidate, like a project about public housing, good public housing, both developed by government or developers at that moment, Tulou, by Wanke, etc., right? But since you have that kind of a core discourse, that central focus vanishing, right? Then, of course, compound sort of with the other issues. For example, we virtually today we don't have a sort of a public discussion platform anymore, right? It's all like saturated with the social media, sort of celebrating personal charm, or celebrity architects, sort of success, right? There's very few public issues we can group together to talk. That's kind of a crisis, right? In the end, of course, you end up with a more or less formalistic discussion, autonomous architecture, attribute, form, tectonics, things. And then the social, I think the social is not finished yet. I would say great achievement with a huge body of excellent work, but they use different naming. Yeah? They change, for example, the civil architecture finished, and then Wang Su took on with that the same media award. He changed to natural construction. Like everyone was confused. And then suddenly from social to completely apolitical natural construction. And then because of course there's emphasis on ecology, materiality, right? But that social implication is disappeared. Then today you look at the Sanli and the joint publishing, they use humanistic city, right? 人文建筑, humanistic architecture. So architects sort of more or less are doing the same thing, but with different naming. But for me, it's crucial. The civil, the implication of civil, the value is disappeared. Then you won't have some criteria anymore there, right? You can create a really nice humanistic, like a sweet, like a good architecture, but that kind of civil value, that whole cluster of discourse is hard to discuss anymore. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You want to?
Yeah, I think that Professor Wang brings up the very interesting question, and about housing. I think that probably I take another perspective, and from the welfare housing, let's say from the 1950s to 80s, actually the housing policy changed in 1998, turned all this kind of welfare housing into market. So they totally changed the mentality of the people, how they perceive what home is. I think that's quite important to see. And now when we go back to, of course, due to the economic impact, but still, I think these are theoretical and the researcher questions haven't yet to address and deeply research, because in China it's always a practical matter of how many meters, what's the price, blah blah. But how people imagine what their ideal home should be and how they dwell in the urban condition, I think that's really needs more research, like from my point of view.
Just one note. I regret to say, I think the housing policy, the change of the housing policy is advised by Hong Kong specialists. And so the Hong Kong model of land economy being adopted by China and make the boosting housing market for the last 20, 30 years.
Land economy.
Yeah,
China learned this whole idea of operation with land economy from Hong Kong, but China actually making the housing, the design code much better than Hong Kong. At least you get some orientation sensitive. Hong Kong doesn't care.
Yeah, we did a little bit kind of this research on those domestic space, and found out in the 1980s, actually they think like a cozy, like a home should be cozy, and but in the late, almost the end of 1990s, it should be luxury, and also that's from commercial promotion. But yeah, I think that's address that's your question about urban condition. I think really, really important, but still haven't yet found how to do the research, how to understand it, and at what dimension or level to link people, architecture, and the city or urban together. But from my point of view, I'm the researcher, I still don't know how to settle it.
So maybe, in around 2011, 12, I think it was published in 13, we did Housing 2030 China. And many of the issues I was very troubled by what happened, because it was exactly what we were discussing, that on the one hand there's really an interest to look at what housing in the future is, and based on the 2030 projection. At the same time, what we see were typological exploration that were towers. And so I think I decided to respond to it and basically just wrote a piece on Hong Kong building codes, and basically looked at, at a certain point when the code changed, to a market-driven one, as opposed to one that is much more flatter and multiple ownership, shifting to a singular developer owner. That is what happened. And this brings me to the point I want to make, which is I think one of the conversation we should have, especially at the roundtable, is to look at, like, with all these work that's been produced, society has been changing very fast, and we need to situate them into the context we're talking about. So, for example, more than 10 years ago, we also hosted a conversation on the rural and the urban. I forgot what it's called, but it was a rural-urban conversation. Homecoming, yes. And so since then, and that's more than 10 years ago, the policies as well as practices with regard to the countryside has changed drastically. And so it's really, and also now architects are actually now following back to, so the idea of home has shifted, and also the understanding of where the village is has also shifted. For the most part, especially for us in Hong Kong, the village is pretty urban. And so these understanding of context and site has changed a lot since the practices and examples we are talking about. I think it's important to discuss that context. Another thing is the awareness of China as a kind of China versus Chinese, and the idea of it being so large that both global south, global north is located in the same country, and that diversity of practices means that the early 1950s to 80s and 90s idea of Chinese identity has shifted a lot also in the last 10 years or so. That really affected practices. And I'm going to just say that if we look at architects who are bit younger, maybe Xiaofeng is not the youngest anymore, but we're starting to see that it has shifted away from the, to Tao's point, the single architect figure, but really much more into issues like labor and who is building and who's the one laying the bricks, to the bricks itself and where the bricks is coming from, and so on. I think that's very rich to think about, because our students are coming into the field right now in this context. So.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on that. Thank you, Eunice, and thanks to everybody for the conversation today and the presentations. I really enjoyed it. I will say, though, in turning to the audience, if I were a student who sat through today's proceedings, I might leave this more confused about the nature of the contemporary than when I came in. I feel like yeah, we've spanned the 18th century through the 20th century up to 2025 in trying to address the temporality, the so-called temporality of the contemporary. And so I do think there's value in focusing and paying attention on, let's say, the last 10 years, 15 years in what's happened in China. And this slide, which I also found very helpful, but at the same time, you know, why do we need to reduce it to a single alternative discourse, right? Isn't there room for a plurality of discourses? You know, Professor Frampton, in talking to Tao, talked about the sheer diversity and the size of China. And there's still this constant kind of impulse to reduce and to limit and to play kingmaker, right, with singular architects, rather than really accommodating what is an incredibly complex and in many ways contradictory environment. In my own research, which among other things is looking at Chinese architectural production in Africa, you have architects born in Sierra Leone, Nigeria, Ghana, who are getting trained at Tongji and Southeast University, and then going back and doing what they do as architects. Is that Chinese architecture? Does it need to be understood more broadly within this kind of rubric? Do those voices need to be included in this type of a conversation? I would say yes, absolutely. So it would be great to see that kind of trajectory emerge in echoing, I think, what Eunice was saying as well, to talk about a whole range of topics, from resource extraction to labor to you know, climate hasn't even been addressed today in any substantial way, which I think is inadequate, frankly, right?
Before we open up the question to the audience, just one more note I'd like to say about city. I think for a period of time, including Yang Ho, in many of his works, I remember the Jianchuan Museum in Chengdu. that the architecture design criteria was to hold the architecture like a street block, and therefore to build. So building has architecture has a context. So, for example, Liu Jiakun designed his building inside, and the peripheral being shops and so on. And I also see kind of a continuation of that in some of Yang Ho's later work. But however, I think architecture, after that, architecture become bigger and bigger to the extent that no longer urban block can solve the problem. This is my puzzle, and I don't have a solution to that. But let's open up to the
I think Michael.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
questions.
Questions from the floor. Maybe you have the microphone. Waiting, you can shout.
Thanks for leaving enough time for discussion with everyone over here. I'm looking at the 3 points on the screen, and I wonder how many of them are already achieved by Chinese architects. Aren't we doing pretty well with some of them? Like recalling Frampton's point saying that actually some of the projects in China very well exemplify the idea of critical regionalism, and also the discussion just mentioned recent prizes like natural building. So I think that's already something that many architects have achieved. However, on the other hand, what is not talkable is still remaining untalkable. And of course, building more ethically is a kind of activism, but if we put that into a whole spectrum, that is very neutral. So my question would be how to have bigger impact, not necessarily on the, something very large, but let's say how to affect the policy, how to allow some more some deeper changes in the way Chinese organizes and works. Thanks.
It wasn't a question, it's a comment.
It was a question. How?
Maybe I'll just say a quick thing, because I was very struck by, I was thinking like which architect or architectural practice are actually directly affected policy. And actually, Yu Kongjian's sponge study has become policy. And I come from a country where many architectural propositions become policy because simply architects went into public service, and so they are in HDB, they are in also, they make the policy. So it's kind of, I think that's a really good thing to discuss. Like,
one more example would be, just a few weeks ago, our students visited Urbanus and was discussing with Meng Yan in person about how their, rediscovery of the urban village issue from the Biennale eventually affected some of the policies in Shenzhen. I think that was a very successful example as well. But again, that process of going from architectural practice to some, tangible impact is still through a detour, and that is also happening. Not a case that is completely replicable. So, how can we do better?
Could I maybe could I follow? Yeah. So I'm with you. I think architects have addressed a lot of these, especially maybe the top one. But my extension of that would be to ask, coming back to, I think you made the point about people talking about standard, basic, but also there was some other, I think, related discourse of objectivity. Liu Yichun even uses the word Sachlichkeit. From German, it's a kind of objectivity and a kind of thinginess, which is very like basic or standard. And what I'm wondering is, and I'm also thinking of Wang Yang's cathedral and shed. If basic and standard and Sachlichkeit means eliminate the difference between basic, shed and cathedral. If what is calling for is the elimination between shed and cathedral, wouldn't that solve a lot of the problems? Because this discussion, the one thing that bothers me is that architecture is being put at a second order practice to policy making. And it's not if we insist that the specific practice of architecture is socially first order, and we have to find an architecture not that produces policy, let the policymakers make the policy, the architecture contributes to society as architecture. And I think maybe this call for the elimination between distinguishing between decorated architecture and social architecture, decorated being second order. There was a debate, just one more example, there was the debate, and it hooks into this anthropology question too, between a media theorist and an anthropologist. And the media theorist was saying, well, I'm studying the cultural techniques of hunting, of Native Americans hunting with bow and arrow. And I'm looking at all the arrow, how it kills the animal, how it's, how it's carved, how it's produced. It's a lot what you were saying about how the brick is made. But I don't study the feathers because they're just decoration. And the anthropologist said, but what if the feathers for the Native American are very important because they solicit the spirit animal of hawk and they make the arrow go further? Then isn't the arrow isn't the feather on the arrow the decoration, what we would call the decoration, is the most important thing, because that's where the hawk animal comes in. So that's what I'm saying. Don't make architecture second order. Make it first order. And that's what, yeah.
Can I just say that I totally agree, but I also don't think that it is one or the other. In fact, that's the amazing thing with architecture, is a very expanded field. So it could be first order, it could be all orders, as far as you can. So in a way, it's also not necessary, like to Wei Zhen's earlier point, that I don't think it necessarily has expanded so much. It has also grown very small and down to the brick or to the material. It's which is why one of the architects I was very intrigued by, and who may not be popular now, is Peter Behrens, and how he went and focused on the light bulb. So he was doing his huge turbine buildings, but also the light bulb. And which one has more impact? Actually, arguably, I would say the light bulb. But I think Xiaofeng wants to.
I just want to add one example of some practices happens between like 2000 and maybe 2012 in Shanghai. Was raised by a group of architects, but highly supported by an official called Sun Jiwei. I don't know if you know him. He was trained as an architect, but then he served as in the government of Qingpu province, Qingpu district, one of the districts in Shanghai, and he promote what we called at the time called New Jiangnan style or New Jiangnan architecture. Let's forget about the word of style. But anyway, I think to raise that, he actually promotes a group of architects, including Yichun, myself, and then some other architects in Shanghai. And then it didn't finally go to a policy, but it actually educate the whole Shanghai municipality, all the government people, even after he retired. I think for now, if you go to Songjiang or Qingpu or the whole Shanghai, people will think about when you do a modern building. The modern building is, because before that, Shanghai is full of kind of a postmodern building or kind of the westernized, the colonial. It was disaster. So I think that was also a disaster, together with the use or the neglection of usage or social effect, because the aesthetic of Shanghai just dies at the moment. So I think that movement actually helps together. I mean, so I should say that I totally agree with the. Rather than degrading. So I think they're both they're both sort of crucial to the architectural world. And then architects, with the help of a visionary authority, can also help the whole discourse of architecture, and then help to change and to the whole scenario of architectural world of a city into a better direction. Yeah, this is what I want to add.
Thank you. Yeah, John, please. John.
As I listen through the dialogue, I'm still searching for my thoughts and my question, but it keeps evolving around the last goal or whatever, discourse that rather than degrading of architecture is about making architecture more available for society. I have a feeling that everyone in this room is already very conscientious in not degrading architecture. I quite believe that. But how to make architecture more available for society is a very, very complex goal. And what society? We talk about society as if it's a very identifiable unit or client or people. If you ask the bulk of the Hong Kong people or people who are vocal, they will say, yeah, more speculative housing is great. It makes money for the city. And it makes money for the government because a land sale is beneficial to the government coffers. So how do we break that very controlling society structure to allow us to really upgrade our architecture? Seem to be a really fundamental issue. And I would say that from my own contact with non-architects, I would say the majority don't really know what quality architecture is about in terms of their everyday life. And that is a fundamental problem, because at the end of the day, we're briefed by our clients. We're controlled by our client to a large extent. Some of us fight very hard against it, or try very hard to re-educate our client, or offer them new opportunities. But that takes a lot of energy, and in most cases, it's not easy to succeed. So if we're really looking for an upgraded architecture, what can we do? I mean, educating the young is a very important and potent activity, but it doesn't really address larger problem, I feel.
Yeah, I'd like to. I'd like to make some comments to your issues. Let me make clear one thing. One thing clear, that since I'm in the section of theory for today's symposium, the theoretic issue that I talked about, it's not so much housing. Housing is one aspect of social issue, but I think the social issue that I talked about as a theoretical issue is the use of architecture. I think the use of architecture to the end is a social issue. And that's a difference between architecture discipline and the discipline of anthropology. Because architecture discipline is talking about the ideas and the form, space. That's okay. That's, the fundamentals of architecture. That's okay. But what I call the alternative discourse. That I hope that can address your question. Why alternative? Why alternative? Because it is beyond this kind of mainstream comprehension of architecture of the discipline, and to go beyond that, whatever, to anthropology and to social issues, and to the use of architecture, how architecture is used, not only architecture is how architecture is created and constructed. Okay.
Yeah, and I think the focal issue here is dichotomy, or and we are trying to dismiss dichotomy or black and white thinking, and now I think the two issues that I want to raise here, to if we have any reflection on these issues, to make it more plural or more multiplicity. One is, I think, how architects, the architecture discipline look at market, right? Because we, in architectural thinking, it's always like market is evil, and the commercial issue is the enemy of architecture. But I think particularly like we see in Hong Kong, the mature developers and how they design the housing is from the from their marketing department, and how did the marketing department design the plan, as Professor Zhu just said, that you rejected the Van Gogh's commission because they already had a mature plan, and they just want you to design facade. But I mean, sometimes if we don't take a black and white thinking on market, this thing of market, that market means users, means people's free choice, right? And then the developers, if they had the plan, they are very close to the users, and the developers' marketing department, they were closely connected with the users, and they reflect the users' free choice, although it is very much bounded. Yeah, this is I mean, this is one issue on with some reflection on the dichotomy of market and architecture. And a second issue is
I think we should give opportunity to other.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Just 1 minute, because I think this is very really worth discussion. I mean, about the communism time of China. If we talk about this contemporary architecture, Chinese architecture, like Professor Frampton also said, Liu Jiakun's design is. He said the West Village is, in his mind, in his impression, it was dark. Why it was dark? I mean, I think that was a stereotype about communism time. Yes. And that, and Professor Wang also mentioned that you said that time had no concept of architectural design. But I read an article during the Cultural Revolution by Yang Tingbao, and he said, because that time, I think that time also had a value of turn upside down, that you must respect working people, right? Working people is higher than intellectuals. And so
sorry, my duty here is to moderate. So
just one, okay.
Apologize.
That Yang Tingbao said
one sentence. One sentence.
Okay, one sentence. He said, therefore, we turn our eyes, learn from working people. Let's look at tectonic, because that's how working people work on the bricks. I mean, that is during the communist time.
Okay, thank you. Donald, the last question, yeah? And we can respond all together with your comments.
I think architecture makes visible the value of the society that architects work in. We are frustrated because we do not agree with the value that we see. Can architecture be a tool, in its own kind of autonomy to criticize that value? I think this is what criticism from within is all about. I think we have lost the kind of craft or theory where we can use architecture itself to criticize, the value that we see, and hopefully we could influence, through architecture our work, to give alternative. And I think, it is about not just practice, but have a theory to back it up. But also the important part is the criticism. How can we use architecture building itself as a critic?
Very good. Anyone like to respond to this?
Yes. In fact, your questions are similar. It's all about this relationship between architecture and society. It's not an easy question to answer, of course, but I think let's not to forget, first of all, architecture is a discipline, which means it has a core knowledge. And as architects, as students studied in architecture school and graduated from these schools, the better schools especially, they are prepared to offer the society or anyone the best we know about architecture, which means that there's already a conflict because number one, the client has no idea, or the government, it doesn't matter what is the best of architecture. And then secondly, even if they know a bit, they may not want it because they are not interested in architecture. So we can imagine change the society or the clientele or the government. Maybe we could improve a bit by doing our best. All we can do as architects, we always offer the best. And our office, because we want to offer the best, and then we lose the job, and then so be it. Because we don't want to offer anything less than what we know as best. That's it. I think a few architects is going to be architect / activist, and architect / something. Maybe architect / developer would be also very interesting, which means also architect mayor. Rome has had at least two. I remember both of them. The second one was a young woman, but it doesn't matter. And most architects would be architects, or you do other design work, which means it's not a sort of big game changer kind of a job. And just do that job well. Social consciousness is we all need to have, but it doesn't mean that you don't need to really learn design well. You can just go out to protest. So I'm having a very reactionary attitude. But I still remember the day I graduated from Berkeley. I was working in the studio day and night. And then there's one of my classmates went out on the streets, protest about something I don't remember even, but I'm sure he's doing the right thing. And then of course at the graduation, he went up the stage to give the talk on behalf of the graduating class and so on. That's his choice, but I don't think that's the only choice. And if he doesn't really draw much, I don't know how he could be a good architect in the end. It's really it's something like that. If you want to serve the society more directly, maybe medicine would be better than architecture. I'm not being ironic at all. Because architecture, if you look around, if you be a product designer, a lot of people can afford an iPhone, which is a good piece of a design. But unfortunately, we are even more expensive than yacht design. How many people can afford architecture? Probably not a whole lot. A lot of architects I know. It's very interesting to see when they buy an apartment, they talk like all the others. Of course, right? That's what we could afford. You can't afford really, it's just too expensive. We can't change that either. I'm not being actually pessimistic, I have to say. I think if we all collectively do more better architecture, eventually down the road, something's going to happen. But just to say, today, we are not having probably the right clientele, our sympathetic society. What do? We still start just whatever we could do, and then we do that.
May I pop in and say that we have an architect who recognizes good architecture, who had joined the real estate community, and if there are more of those, it will also help our cause.
Yes.
I do think. Sorry. Yeah, I do think. I want to say also the importance is a little bit back to education, but it's only at upper levels of educational institutions that this can even be discussed. That's one point. Maybe this, since we're all here, we know that. But also, I think it's extremely important that even though Hong Kong has its own problems, Shanghai has its own problems, Boston has its own problems, we have to always talk to each other and cross. And I'm going back to this thing. We got to stop the East-West thing. And I'm preaching to the choir, I know, but I just want to remind us how important those two things are. I think because, as Frampton was saying, as the states become more isolationist, I need even more the kind of cross-cultural discussions as well.
Yes. Okay. Great. Yeah. With that, thank you very much.